So I have a German teenager telling me that this is uncomfortable because she's a German speaker, she's learning English, she wants to learn Portuguese, and she's not in any of these categories, but she has to choose a category. So it's like a forced self-positioning. And their perception of learner is actually quite fascinating. So these are distributed through their blogs. And what do they remind you of? Like free language. Free language. And speaking. And free language. There's a very strong like comparison to those political posters that your learner, that being on Duolingo is a radical thing, is a political act there. Okay? And with Busuu, it's slightly different. You have your photo, you show your age, you wear, what you speak, your language, what you want to learn, country, and this. Okay, so you have a verb about me, and the fourth self-positioning is that if you're not paying, you can't have any other photo than this little tiny one. And then you can also have a deliberate self-positioning part. This is the garden. So the hedgehog that I bought is here. So you can buy other stuff. Okay? On the first page that I've seen somebody else got rainbow and UFO and other stuff, and it's really fascinating. And I was like, how come I can't take those like that? And then the apples are when you help others to learn and correct. Okay? And then you get an apple. Right? And the other fourth self-positioning is that they give you the freebie ads. They know that I want shoes. They study as you work. Liverpool University is everywhere on their banner ads basically. And sometimes it depends on which day and what time, I guess, is that they get me to lose weight or get a bikini body, that kind of summer things there. So getting really depressed sometimes. And on this page, as I said before, you have the profile of two presumable Busuu user. Okay, so you get a little photo of little verbs there, and there are about 10 of them. That you can click 100 times, and those people will come back again onto you. And it's quite interesting who they are, as said by Busuu. For example, that all the people that appears is Spain is like 4 presumed characters from Spain. And one from Germany, 2 from UK, and 1 from Indonesia, 1 from US, 1 from Tunisia. So there are learners who got story about themselves, like, and I and you, I really love Busuu, for example, and say like, and you can learn with me as well, something like that. So you have 2 types of learner, that you have the communicative type, and say learn directly from native speakers. You can meet new people from different continents to learn more about their cultures. Or the grammar-oriented learners, is like improving my knowledge of English and French vocabulary. You can learn vocabularies and key phrases. What they don't tell you is like if you don't pay, you don't get the key phrases at all. So they have projected, both websites have certain kind of idealized learners that you should identify with, that if you join that community there. But if we check on the Alexa, about these 2 websites, it's quite interesting that they give you a different profile of their actual user. So Duolingo, if you're looking for boyfriends, actually that's actually quite a nice website to go and start, I think, because it tends to be Hispanic. I assume that they're talking about the site where the access is, so it's going to be Spanish speaking. And appeals to childless, moderately educated men under the age of 35. I don't know how they know demographic. Exactly. So boyfriend seekers go to Duolingo and browse from school and home there. And if you're looking for a girlfriend, go to Busuu. They tend to be disproportionately less affluent and childless women browsing from school and home who have postgraduate education. So more intelligent, really intelligent users. So you see, like, how I'm trying to position myself as a user, and how they project the idealized user and certain media reforms of 3 different presses, done 3 possibilities here. So, and thinking that it's just some concluding thoughts there is the learning, is the when they present the learning, the discourse of learning, you have the textual, you have the visual, you have the interaction with programs or user. And then the autobiography of me as a learner and the textual from the homepage, from the official website. And there's actually, I'm starting to scratch and present only some of the materials. And they have a lot more when you consider their blogs, and they are bombarding you every day with new information and emails and phone messages there, and blogs and medias. And positioning is the actual socialization that unfolds in interaction. So I was thinking that all these multiple sources actually help me or stop me from creating my own discourse as a learner, or how I acquire that category as a learner on Busuu or on Duolingo. And there are also a lot more interesting things going on. That one of my recent parts I'm really hooked on right now is kawaii as a mode of positioning. And the discursive space for learner autonomy, that's one of my interests. Like, for example, the thinking and the hissing. I didn't show any example, but I'm like collecting lots of example about hissing people, because Busuu there, they say that you're learning from native speakers, and then when people start making mistakes, as teachers, as correcting, there are lots of hissing. There's like, you call yourself native speakers of Chinese or English, blah, 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 blah. It's really as nasty as YouTube sometimes. And that's how you actually create certain space for what you can do outside what they allowed you to do on the website there. And then the kawaii thing is that it's quite fascinating. In 2011, that was their logo. It's kind of, I always think about this as more of a steampunk look to the owl. And then 2012, actually when it goes public, the owls looks really cute. And when you're out of heart, which happens to me quite a lot, he starts crying with me. And also the whole website use really cute colors and Japanese style, but westernized Japanese style in a way, that kind of cool kawaii style. I don't know how to exactly describe this. That is actually quite difficult for me to negotiate. That I don't usually go for that kind of things, like this kind of thingy. But if you want to join in with the community, you have to accept that. There. So I'm just trying to figure out, or just trying to work my way into thinking that how massive online language learning can be understood by think about how the learners or the users are positioned, and how learning is being presented as a discourse.
So I think we have until 3:30 for Q&A and questions and discussion. So would you like to say anything? Do you want to sit up front, or are you happy there? Are you happy standing behind the plants? And so any questions or comments for the 2 presenters?
Just a methodological question. We started off with the ethnographic study of this participant observer. You said learning foreign language for leisure. But then I just sense that you're learning that for your research project.
That's a good point.
I'm stressed out when I do that. Participant observer. And your friends, you also direct them to this ethnographic spies. Okay. So basically, I think you're doing a CDA critical discourse analysis of the website.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that I'm not really doing it recreationally. I mean, but there is some problem that with website like this, you have to participate to get the data, and you have to become or to negotiate your positions within the community, the user community there. Or you can do any critical discourse analysis like that. So I don't know how to resolve that. And maybe I shouldn't be calling it recreational.
Can I just say something about the recreational bit? Because I think I find that quite interesting. I mean, not only from your perspective as the researcher, but also for anyone that's participating on these websites, these services, because I find these services to be quite formal in the way they approach learning. So you buy things, you lose hearts, you collect things, you have a little landscape. So it seems very formal to me. So it seems like it's not. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the research, but it just seems like these services in particular are they're formalizing the language learning aspect. The aspects of language learning, and I find that a lot of the language learning that I've experienced online have been far removed from something like that. For instance, chatting online in a language that you're trying to learn is quite different.
Yeah.
It's like language learning in the wild as opposed to this quite didactic or structured system that you presented here.
I know. I mean, this is a very strange thing that you're actually moving a classroom, a physical classroom, and the curriculum sort of, or certain types or certain idea of curriculum online. That when you follow the skill tree or whatever, like level 1, level 2 Spanish there, that they have a certain idea of how language should be learned or can be learned or can be taught from their perspective.
But what's screaming out is the commodification of language.
Yeah.
But this is not this website, it's the global commodification discourse of language. But this website is just appropriating that discourse.
And I guess the strangest things for me to discover is that it's not the really tight structure or of that kind of language learning as opposed to like, oh, let's do that on chat room. That's really kind of interesting. Is the research interest in that? Is that if you try, for example, there's Live Mocha that is actually the biggest one that you don't actually find any research on. Because
I know someone who's done research on it.
I know someone who's finished their
it's like
PhD.
very, very small number. I should correct myself, like very small number, very, very small number.
Yeah.
Compared to when you think about they claimed 30 million users. Or Live Mocha is actually like in the hundreds of millions, actually like 200 million is last time they claimed something like that. And it's it doesn't really attract certain kind of research interests.
Well, it's interesting, it's anecdotal, but there's a lot of speculation that a lot of the participants in MOOCs, in massive open online courses, are academics. So whether so you're doing what people say a lot of the people participating in MOOCs are, because they're academics getting in there to see what the environment's like, to understand it, possibly for research purposes, but I think probably more so for teaching purposes, to understand what's going on. So it's like as if your paper was in 2 parts. There was some initial activity that got you going into this, and that's really the second part that's emerged as this really substantial research. And I kept thinking as I was listening to you that it would be great to use a similar approach to MOOCs. And you could learn so much about MOOCs with the kind of questions that you're asking and the theoretical frameworks that you're applying.
That's the first stop. If you join a course on Coursera, then they give you a questionnaire about what you expect from the course and whatnot. The first
You've been into Coursera.
The first option is I want to learn more about teaching and learning online. So that's assuming that's a major category of people who are not interested in the concept.
So we have a question.
In this, the 2 sites you looked at, are kind of examples of different things, both which are getting common. So the Duo logo was originally an example of collective intelligence. How do you get everyday people to do a task like translate the internet so it's not all in English by creating something else they can do? right?
Yeah.
And supposedly that's fulfilling a social good. It's like the game Fold-it, where people fold proteins.
Yeah.
The other one is an example of gamification, which is a combination of game design principles and business principles from customer loyalty things. It's meant to make money. And it's based on a particular idea that gamifying things makes stuff that is hard more engaging to humans. And it's also married, in this case and many others, with microfinancing, right? And there's if you get X number of people involved, many of them are involved because of the social stuff or because of the gamified elements like getting points. A 10% down will buy something, right? And actually you don't make even money on those 10% because it's 1% that will buy a ton of stuff. I mean, they'll keep giving you money. It's the Zynga model, the Farmville model.
Exactly.
And then Coursera is another model. I mean, and all of these are using the word loosely types of businesses, right? And they all, what intrigues me about them is, first of all, they all have a business plan, even if they're not some way to sustain themselves. And lots of controversy about what those plans would be, because like microfinance stuff is very manipulative. And then they all have to have a theory of learning, right, or teaching. And they don't, they all get it from different places. I mean, it isn't like they run out to a journal and read it, right? In many cases, it's their assessment of what the market will bear, right? So there's a bunch, and then lots of them are of the startups. I mean, some of them might be owned by very big, companies like Microsoft, but others are just two guys in a garage. It's just an aside. There's a guy named Noah Bushnell, who was one of the big founding figures of video games. He founded Atari, an older man now, and he then went on to find Chuck E. Cheese, which hopefully you don't know about. But he's starting a new company now to do this type of teaching for language learning. And this has got we're replacing what colleges traditionally did or schools did in a model. And it is interesting that they still accept all of these things, the model that language learning is largely memorizing stuff, and it's more about writing and speaking, right?
And Duolingo is actually really bad at this as well, because basically they are saying that they want you to translate. So the whole exercise.
But they have a back end in which all the translations get judged by multiple people, and then the best one wins. And in the end, even a smallish language get translated on the internet. So I'm not so sure they care about language learning as much as getting the internet translated.
So you're using the translation method to try to learn the language there. So it's really going back 50 years.
But is that a utopian idea? What is that to get the internet translated? Because that's being superseded anyway.
It's the guy who founded it had the idea that the day will come where there'll be no privileged language on the internet, and that anything can be translated immediately.
But that's happening.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like it's being superseded.
He's trying to speed it up rather than, he had a little, so if you were to pay translators to do it, it would be more money than there is in the world. So this is how to do it free. And have people have fun, or at least think they're learning something.
They're quite divergent, aren't they?
Two different models.
Two very different models that you chose, which is great.
So it's following on from James's point. What's interesting about the business plans is how many of these things don't have a business plan. We'll assume one will be coming on further on down the line, which is interesting in itself. I think there is a lot of parallels here with the games research, particularly stuff about the regulation, reduction of behaviour in games, and this whole idea of lack of autonomy in the individual. And there's some really interesting research done by a colleague of ours in Melbourne about counterplay and how spaces for resistance by gaming against the system. So that's a really interesting one in terms of language and how they dehumanise the language. The other thing that just struck me is about algorithms and how little we understand the algorithms behind the software that we're looking at. That'd be fascinating to go and steal that. No. So much of it's hidden. And I think a lot of it comes back to the previous presentations about unpacking the black box of the technology. So the app is programmed and designed and developed and marketed and sold. So lots of the most interesting sociological research in technology looks at the front end and talks about how designers configure the user, both from an economic sense and from a kind of technical sense, and all that's what's fascinating as well. So in terms of research project, there's so many different ways to go.
Really?
Yeah.
just like to, my question is more related to Phil's presentation, more explicitly anyway, because I was really interested in the underlying idea that discourse analysis can help us to determine whether learning is taking place, and that was, because that directly relates to some of my own work, and it's something that was, so I was just wanting you to speak a little bit more about that, because you said that you think, you're hoping that this methodology might help people to do that very thing, but at the same time, you sort of seem to suggest that there's a discourse that says it's hard to know when people have learned something unless you ask them, or test them, or something like that. So do you think that, is your impression that there is actually already a lot of evidence that you can use discourse analysis this way?
Well, I think maybe Chris will have a comment as well, because Chris is kind of involved in that area, that which I'm just kind of interested in. I have no real experience in it. But I mean, the general problem is, even if you tell me that you learned a lot from Alice's presentation, I don't know whether to believe you or not. Right? How do I know that you really did learn? And at that level, then it would be very difficult to say anything about learning at all. So I guess that we have to go a certain number of removes from that to start to look at things which suggest, well, probably, you know, if you tell me you learned a lot, well, probably you did learn a lot. You know, if 1,000 people tell me that, probably some of them did. So, but then in relation to the conversation analysis methodology, my impression of that research is that, and Chris may disagree with me here, is that I don't see that it's going very far, because, like, you get an article which analyzes sort of a 5-minute transcription of classroom data and shows that possibly somebody improved their knowledge of one. You know, so if all learning depended upon that, if that was the only way that people learn, people would never learn anything. So there must be much more learning taking place than you can actually account for through that kind of discourse analysis. And I suspect that's the case here, because I mean, all I'm doing is looking at comments that people have left on videos. But I think that, I mean, even when you look at like the percent, I think it's about 1% of the comments, the number of comments is usually around 1% of the number of views that are recorded. Is it actually 0.1? I think it's more like 0.1% of the people who viewed it. So in a way, what I'm trying to do is to use the comments and the kinds of things that go on in the comments as some kind of indication of what might be going on in people's heads when they're actually watching, what they may be thinking.
Which immediately suggests that it would be a fantastic exercise to interview people about after they've watched the video, rather than rely on comments, which is a particular kind of genre, not maybe much more limited. Maybe it would just be better to look to interview people and see in all other kinds of ways about what they've learned.
Well, I mean, it depends on whether you're interested.
I could give another
I know.
paper.
I know. No.
That's not this paper.
I know.
Well, that wouldn't be discourse analysis.
No, it could be.
It would be.
Well,
Well, it could be.
Well, I mean, but I get a
See
sense
what they
that
say?
what you're interested
Because,
in is...
sorry, could I answer the question? Because that would go back to the problem is, if Brian tells me that he's learned, how do I know that he's learned?
Yeah.
Or what he's learned, or what is it exactly?
Well, I mean, that's the issue. I mean, I think,
one step closer.
yeah, I think from an introductional point of view, I mean, I think the crux, well, first of all, you need to define what you mean by language and what you mean by learning. That's from the very beginning. What aspect of language are you looking at? And I'm not saying you have or have done, have not done. I'm just saying, as a researcher looking at technology acquisition or any language learning, you need to define what do you mean by language? Do you mean, third person singular S? Do you mean pragmatic norms? And then what do you mean by learning? I mean, often people think of learning as a linear process that, people accumulate facts, but then it could be unlearning as well. And so from a methodological point of view, going back to your question, Brian, I think yes, you can identify learning, you can track learning, but it's very difficult, as you've noted, when you read CA papers, it's like one aspect of learning over the course of 5 minutes or over the course of 6 months or whatever. And that's the limitation of CA, and that's the limitation of discourse analysis, is that it's very difficult to identify changes in cognitive states, which is essentially what learning is. It's a change in some type of state, whether it's unlearning or learning. And so it becomes very easy to interview or to read comments, because what you're doing is you're looking at displays of competence rather than displays of learning. I mean, you're looking at one state rather than
Yeah.
a learning
That's
as a process.
That's right.
You're looking at the product rather than the process, and I think looking at the process is a very difficult thing to do, but I don't think it's impossible.
Well, it's
And then-
bridging them as well. So, you know, I have data from my sexuality education classrooms where I see students engaging in prolonged conversations about sex, for example, and then they have to adjust about how their selves fit with that, and they have to balance social needs in the classroom, and you know, you get a sense that they're gaining insight, but you can't put your I can't make that leap to say they've learned something, because as you say, they might not even be fully aware of it themselves. But as the analyst, you look at it and you go, well, I see here that something's happened in this past 10 minutes of conversation. The person has been, you know, they've changed the way they're talking about it. So is that not evidence that they've learned something? That's I think where the discourse analysis has trouble making the leap across, is that, okay, well, when they walk out of the classroom, are they going to remember it? Is it retained, or is it a momentary?
Well, I think discourse analysts are scared of being confident about what they mean by learning. I mean, if you read papers, they're scared to just make a claim about what they mean, what learning is. And I think that's what you need to do initially. You know, in the very beginning, you need to just state, this is what I mean by learning. It's a change. And then if people disagree, which they will inevitably do, you know, then that's fine. It's just that's your definition of learning.
Just I've had a moment to think, to come back to what Alana said. I think the issue is that I could observe people watching videos. I could ask them to post comments. I could ask them what they've learned. But what I think I could do by looking at comments is that I can look for the evidence of learning outside the context of any kind of. I'm looking at something that's occurred already naturally, rather than something that I've set up. That's a kind of educational experiment or something like that. And I'm not saying that would be, that's another kind of evidence. That would give me another kind of evidence. But what I think is the interest in looking at the comments as well, because I've done that kind of research, but looking at the comments directly as well, is that you're getting a kind of naturalistic evidence, which actually CA people really value. I mean, CA people tend to say, you can't learn anything except by looking at how people interact. That's a bit of an overstatement, I guess, but it's a certain sort of orientation to where you really get knowledge about people's sort of behaviours and norms and so on. It's actually interaction, so that's better answer than I did before.
I think there's something really strange going on. There's so much talk about learning on the internet. You're looking at YouTube comments. People are not just swearing at each other, they're talking about learning. That's sort of amazing. Carl and I have looked at Flickr, lots of stuff on Flickr. Suddenly realised people are quite often talking about learning. What is it about the writing space, the fact that it stays there, the spaces for reflexivity? I've looked in particular on Flickr at 365, where people take a photo a day for a year. It's not half, but an incredible number of them are ecstatic about what they learned about themselves, about photography, about the world. There's something strange about the internet and learning, and it seems to be a pretty good place for it.
Or is it because we're looking for the sort of people that comment on the learning classes that do that kind of thing, and the big silent majority are just passively consuming?
Are you saying it's strange that we are doing that, or it's strange that people think that there wouldn't be?
I think on something called 365, where random people take photos of them a day for a year, which is about photography. They come out in rhapsodies about learning.
But they're not random people, are they just the sort of people that would do, that's such a commitment to do, so they're kind of self-improvers,
there is a whole discourse about
Kind
improvement. And I agree there's a whole discourse about self-improvement. But I think elsewhere on Flickr isn't about learning, YouTube isn't about learning, but it just seems there's something's going on there.
But I'm not sure what you're saying. I'm kind of coming at this from the interest in self-directed informal learning, where you're kind of constantly engaged in this debate with people who say who were saying that learning only takes place in school, right? So I guess I'm doing research, we're all doing research which is trying to prove what's a rather obvious point to us, is that there's a lot of learning taking place outside school. And I mean, we're coming from a perspective here where perhaps no longer, but a few years ago people said anything on YouTube is rubbish. It's really silly. It's a clickbait. People are just wasting their time. I mean, my son's school, you're not allowed to watch YouTube. It's bad. It's blocked. Because why is it blocked? I actually emailed the principal and said, I'm actually sort of doing research here. But in a lot of schools, you're just not allowed to do these things. You're not allowed to look at these things because they're assumed to be non-educational.
No, that's because of pornography.
There's not much pornography.
You must be joking.
They tried to do
I think James.
Yeah, there is, but the school kids are not looking at it. They're not interested.
Yeah, I mean, if one
School kids aren't interested in pornography.
Not as much as adults.
Of course they are.
Okay, enough about pornography. I think James.
Yeah, I think with the internet too, though, this dichotomy between school as a place of learning and outside as a place of informal learning is completely gone, because there's a lot of formal learning on the internet. But back to this question about what discourse analysis and learning, there are sites on the internet, lots of them, fan fiction sites would be a good example, but lots of other sites where people are designing or modding or stuff that are actually set up by people to teach each other and to learn. And they very clearly, so take a fan fiction site, they very clearly lay out what the norms are, what they think is being learned. It's a genre. They will discuss quite directly the relationship of grammatical correctness to the genre in this place. You have lists of readers, you get feedback. You can actually watch the fan fiction writers writing over the whole time. So if you do a discourse analysis, there's some of this in the book I wrote in Women as Gamers with my wife, with fan fiction sites of 15-year-old girl. You could trace her whole career, and you could see that she went from one stage to a masterful person, what she did, and you can trace all the. It's really a wonderful way of the discourse of learning becomes completely transparent, and it doesn't matter whether you can see inside her head or not. By the time she's writing critically acclaimed fiction with thousands of readers, the community has made that decision, and that she's hit their norms. And what I find interesting in a lot of that is, I don't know, and many times whether you should characterize that as formal learning or informal learning. It's really a lot of both.
I think on that, I mean, I definitely agree with you on that point, and Rebecca Black has done the research in the second language context.
She was my student.
Very directly showing somebody learning a second language, producing that kind of evidence. But the only thing I say about that is that, in a sense, because fan fiction sites are so text heavy, I mean, they're all words, and the more difficult issue is to show, I think, the same kind of thing going on where there's much more visual stuff going on, where it's much more multimodal.
Although there is
much less.
There's a lot of fan fiction written around the game The Sims, where by their genre you have to have images and words, and you have to Photoshop the images. So the kids and there, of course, you have a different set of norms, because you have to have norms both for the photoshopping of the things, words, and how they fit together. So you're producing multimodal text. But it's not YouTube, right? It's still as text heavy in that regard.
But what I mean is that the kind of comments that are left on fan fiction are kind of explicitly intended to be constructive and to help and so on.
Right.
Whereas we know that in other contexts where commenting takes place, YouTube especially, that's really not clear. That's what the purpose of the comment is.
Phil, that's what I was thinking of. With your presentation, it was fascinating. I kept genre kept coming into my head, and that was like as if it would be just fantastic to do analysis of the connections between the discourses, but also the genres, because there are different genres of comments, and we're going to hear that from you too, from other kinds of comments, and obviously David as well. That it's not just comments, and it's not a ubiquitous category that everybody writes and responds in the same way. That distinction would be really, really good about a YouTube comment, the genre of a YouTube.
That's another way of cutting it across, because if you go right back to the beginning of the internet and where you get sort of intellectual interaction and engagement on the internet. It was through VBS systems
Yeah.
and YouTube comments and the Facebook comment. Every new technology has a VBS system
Yeah.
built into it, which is like almost the oldest
Yeah.
internet genre.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in that it's just very, very persistent.
No, but I think that there are also,
And there are
the
different
characteristics,
yeah.
there are different characteristics
Yeah,
of those
absolutely.
comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about that before with Flickr and YouTube, for
Yeah.
example. Flickr comments are unbelievably constructive.
Yeah, and
Whereas YouTube comments.
Yeah.
Is that something to do with the difference between a still image and a moving image? You know, that's the only difference. You know?
Would you give this?
Why is it? Why does that happen?
Probably, yeah.
There are places on YouTube where people
Yeah.
write.
Well,
Learning to play the guitar sites,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
There are some
Yeah.
slight,
Yeah.
the rude areas.
But I think going back to your comment about the characteristics of YouTube comments, I mean, I don't think it's exclusive to YouTube, because I think you get that throughout the different types of sites that you see online. I mean, it's the sort of the typical trolling behavior, for example. I mean, people go on,
yeah.
Right.
they're anonymous, and they sort of feel free that they can do and say whatever they want to say, and they do. I mean, and it's quite demonstrable in their
Yeah.
comments that they have this freedom, and they use it in a certain way. But I don't think it's YouTube specific.
I don't think anything's. I mean, it's difficult to say anything's YouTube specific
Yeah.
now because like the whole of human life is on YouTube. You can find everything on YouTube.
Hopefully
So,
we're not going to get abused.
so you pick out something you say, including
But this
lectures.
is on YouTube.
Comments about your clothing.
Right, we still have 8 minutes. Any other comments or questions?
Can I add a comment?
Yes, please.
Well, just that idea, why is Flickr so polite by comparison to YouTube? And I don't know if anybody knows, but is there a kind of community norm? Does Flickr set up? Is there a how to use this site kind of page or something like that, where you can actually position the users in particular ways? And does YouTube try to do the same thing? I mean, I know Wikipedia has really elaborate rules about behaviour, including arbitration if you get into disputes and things like this. So I just thought maybe the site owners have come up with something.
There's nothing that you have to read before you go on Flickr. I'm not sure people do.
Are there moderators?
You can self-rate your photos as sort of in the middle or should be restricted. There's some
But
self-monitoring.
no one from Flickr moderating the discussions.
You can report. No, but you can report. You can report.
That's the same as
So YouTube, you can report.
But they also have a history as well, and I think that can easily be overlooked because I was quite early on into Flickr, and but there's a kind of distinctive way of behaving in Flickr. And I think that does say quite a lot about how people inhabit that site and the norms that grow up along that, even though it's unregulated or self-regulated. Perhaps would be the way to explain it.
I guess or something like that, and maybe probably can look it up when I'm saying the
already has.
the demographics of each site. I always stereotype Flickr as kind of photo geeks kind of showing off their best photographs or wedding photographs, whereas YouTube's for the people with cats and I mean, whether it's to do with age or class or there's all sorts of reasons why you might have slightly more different interactions at age.
But the number of YouTube users is approaching, it's going to exceed the number of people in the world. So it doesn't have a demographic, it's so big it doesn't have a demographic.
But not all YouTube users are YouTube posters.
Yeah.
Most people register for
Yeah.
YouTube, actually don't post on it.
Yeah, that's
Or
what-
upload.
That's with everything. Consumers rather than.
About 100 million accounts.
Yeah.
It's a
I
lot.
think Dr. Gruber has a question.
Thank you. It's more of a comment, and I just want to say I like that you picked up that term digital flaneur. And I was wondering why you used it, but I think that term, back when things used to be called cyber culture studies or cyber text, it's been used before. But I've never seen it in the context of learning, or specifically language learning, I think I've seen it, you know, with in the kind of sort of hypertext linking, because it's this thing that, you know, exists in this space between detached flirtation, but also the detachment is key. You know, it's like this, you're looking for pleasure, but you're detached and you're bored at the same time. So you just kind of roam around the city, but it's the type of person who roams, and it's usually a wealthy person in a post-industrialized, turn-of-the-century environment who wants to take in the cityscape because there's boredom, looking for pleasure and flirt, but not be involved and detached. So I just think there's a lot to mine there, or to reappropriate in this context, because you said at the outset that it wasn't fun. So if I have a question, I wanted to hear more about why you thought in your experience, phenomenologically speaking, why it wasn't fun, and then why you chose the Flaneur term.
Well, I say it's not fun, but there is pleasure. And you think that I can start counting 1 to 10 in Spanish. But I think that what students were actually a student used the comparison of that word is flaneur, and then I added digital, and then later on I check out the word, the phrase, the terms there. And I think they are trying to use the same idea, that they're really looking around and they're really detached, because they couldn't form, that's the part that they're saying, that they couldn't form a story with any learning resources online that way. So they're detached and they're looking around, and they do have pleasure, but it's not fun. I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but they have the pleasure of learning something. I come from wherever in French. But after that structure, that they couldn't enjoy it, there's the fun element is not really there, because they do have to work hard on it. And I think it doesn't make any sense, right? In a way, but they just find it, they're wondering. They're wanderer. Maybe that's a better word, is not instead of wanderer. Somehow they're like year 3 student, they got the words from cultural study or something. That's the context they can use for it. But it's actually that's maybe one reason why people like to join something like Rolling Wall, that you don't have to wander.
But I mean, do those sites assume that you're going to be there for a long time? I think they say, you know, free for life, free forever. But outside of getting a hedgehog, or I'm thinking, you know, me, I would go to a site like that if I was going to Italy, pick up a couple things. I don't know why people go to this site, or why they assume people go to this site.
Because you can't afford to go to Italy. But you're right, you pick up something that I was quite worried that when they say free forever, for now and forever, I was like thinking that I immediately have De Beers diamond in my head. You know, like, ooh, no, that's kind of but I'm not ready.
I have a question for Phil. You talked about translanguaging in the data, but you didn't show examples of translanguaging in the data. Translingual data, your YouTube comments. So
In the comments,
yeah, because you show English data, you see English comments, and how much, I mean, how translingual the comments.
Transliteration, did you show?
okay, no, I get the question. Well, I wasn't actually saying that the comments are translingual. The video.
Oh, the videos.
The videos, and so I did show examples of translingual practice in videos. So, you know, the English speaker teaching a Cantonese word, or
But the
somebody
comments are
with
English.
blonde hair speaking Cantonese.
But the comments are English.
Well, yeah, on the videos that we look at, there are comments in Chinese, but they tend to be from the people that Alice calls 50 Cent.
Maybe linguistically it's not multilingual, textual
50
level,
Cent.
but
It's
they
a
What's
symmetry.
generation?
what's it?
It's under
50
arbitrary
Cent.
terms.
It's a
Well,
person who
it's
is
a
paid. The person who is paid 50 cents to post comments online to attack anybody who's criticizing China
or Chinese language.
or criticizing Chinese language.
50 cent
So,
party.
Like a street team. Like a street team.
By the time
Music
you
companies
write
are supposed to go on.
Well, I know it's true. I'm not. That's a,
Exactly,
uh,
rumor has it that
Oh, like
the
this-
government
the
has a
government.
team.
Yeah.
Unemployed
No,
students and
I mean,
whatnot.
you'll, come across, you'll certainly come across a comment. It's only very marginally related to the. Well, okay, so a Chinese person is teaching English, and then the comment may be, well, no, actually, the classic one is Fei Wong is speaking Chinese on CNN through an interpreter. And people are commenting that why doesn't she speak English? Is there something wrong with her? She can't speak English. So then comments come in Chinese saying it's because she is proud of her mother tongue. Why should she
Right.
speak English? She is a proud Chinese. All this kind of stuff.
So your belief
those-
is that nobody could possibly say that without being paid?
So
That's the assumption that you're
Yeah,
making.
so-
But that's
And
only
some
an
people
example,
might
but
believe
some,
that.
but some comments are really like, that's like a copy and paste type of comment that it's like a pro whatever, kind of ideology kind of type. That doesn't even make any sense in any context.
So but I've gone off the question, but the answer to the question, I think, is that probably although the videos are involving Chinese and English, but the dominant language in the video is usually English, actually. About 95% of the comments will be in English. So I guess that's significant in itself, but there'll be some Chinese comments. But even the Norwegian woman, the entire video is in Cantonese. The entire video is in Cantonese. I don't think there's any English in the video, because it's from the local TV show. But about 95% of the comments are in English, which is, I guess, is something to interpret. I don't know why that's the case.
But
So
isn't
I
it
think-
also about the input method, like it's easier to do it in English?
If you speak, if you're English.
No, but I know a lot
I
of
don't
people
speak
who know
English.
Chinese, who can read Chinese, but they can't input. Yeah, now,
You can- you can-
Okay, so I think we need to stop now. There's more snacks maybe, more food, and more caffeine. So back in the meeting. Function.